All right. What did you bring?
I brought my first scarf that I bought in Liverpool at my first game I ever attended.
Ooh. All right. Eduardo, what did you bring?
I brought my Hungary jersey.
Excellent. I can already tell it's going to be an excellent conversation. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to Not Quite Strangers. This podcast is an opportunity for you to develop your curiosity, is bringing people who are not quite strangers together for conversation to build connection, develop curiosity, and challenge the status quo. My name is Valerie Hope. I'm your host, and I'm so proud to introduce two really interesting, fascinating people to you today. Today, I bring to you Paxton Ballard, straight out from New York, or I guess White Plains, New York, not New York, and Eduardo Hope, who you may have met at a previous podcast I did, Time to Come Alive, who is my older brother, and he is coming to us from Dallas, Texas. The reason that I brought these two guys together is because they have a passion for something they're going to talk about. And they only met 10, 15 minutes ago and started to have a conversation about it. So I'd like to bring you guys in so you can, first of all, understand what their passion is, what they have in common, and maybe you have a passion about it too. So if you're interested in subscribing to this podcast, please go to notquitestrangers.com. And there you can subscribe and make sure that you get this episode and any others straight into your inbox. Or you can also subscribe to us on YouTube. So, fellas, let's come back to you. All right, Paxton, you got to tell us why was it so meaningful that you had the scarf that you brought to represent your passion for football?
So, a little bit of a backstory was the year was 2008, I believe, and I was just about 14 or 15 years old, and my dad took me to my first Liverpool game in England. And as you can tell, I support Liverpool, but what's so special about this was my father being English, it's very much our culture, the culture to raise up your young lad to go to the game every weekend. And it's a whole day. So you wake up first thing in the morning, you go down and you get a full English breakfast, and then you walk to the pub, and then you hang out, you sing songs, and then you go to the match, and then it's a full day event. So when my dad took me to England, like being from New York, I had no idea I only heard what he did growing up in England. And to experience that for me as a fan at the time was unbelievable. And this was the first thing he got me. He said, "Oh, we have to get you a scarf because this is what you do." And if you guys can notice, it's super like dirty and brown. It's like my little like baby bear that I go to sleep with, and I haven't washed it ever since I got it. But it's just kind of like that's kind of like a superstition thing for me. Like the day I wash it is the day like Liverpool will crumble. So it's working because Liverpool is doing really well right now. But it was just a reminder of like the culture about the game and everything leading up to it that I fell in love with. And the minute that I walked out of up the steps and I saw the pitch for the first time and I heard them sing "You'll Never Walk Alone," it just changed me forever. And that's when I knew that I was in the right spot, and I wanted to play football, but I knew that at least I would always be watching it or supporting it.
You knew that moment that you wanted to play, or you didn't?
I knew I wanted to play before that, for sure. But that when I heard them sing "You'll Never Walk Alone," which is how they start every game, 50,000 people singing "You'll Never Walk Alone," it gives you chills.
How does it go?
Don't make me sing it. But if you want to plug it, it's Gary in the Pacemaker. Yeah, we'll put it in the bio after this. But okay. Just imagine 50,000 people in unison singing one song. I mean, it's amazing. And then to see my idol like Steven Gerrard play was what solidified for me. And I remember that game so vividly as if I played in it. I remember every goal, every pass. It was just a day to remember forever.
That's beautiful. Well, one of the reasons, Paxton, you are a professional soccer player. And when I met you and I was like, oh my gosh, professional soccer player, I literally texted my brother that day and I said, hey, I met this guy in the coaching institute who's a professional soccer player. And he's like, what's his name? So I gave him your name and he said, oh, he's a journeyman player. Blah. And I'm like, I don't know what that means. But it sounded like this would be a great opportunity for the two of you to connect. So Eduardo, tell us about your object and what it means to you.
Well, this jersey was actually a gift from my wife. She and her family went to Hungary to visit a family friend who was teaching there. And they know that I'm a big soccer nut. So they went by the, I guess the Hungarian soccer museum there in Budapest and got me the jersey. And for me, well, two things. One, I think the very first time I saw one of those sticker albums, you know, where we were from in Panama, and many places around the world, people like to collect stickers in anticipation of the World Cup. And the 1978 World Cup sticker album, which is really the only one that I ever collected stickers for and didn't finish it, but anyway, the only one that I collected stickers for. I think it was the first page, or one of the first pages was the Hungarian national team. And for some reason, it just stuck in my head. Who are these people and why are their names so weird? I couldn't pronounce anything. And just very curious. Just kind of stuck in my brain. Many years later, as I was catching up on the 1982 World Cup, which we missed because we had immigrated that year, and the 86 World Cup, I started reading a little bit more history of just football in general. And Hungary has a very big role in how football is played, even today. So it wasn't that my first heroes were Hungarian, but it just made a big impact on me, the role that Hungary had early on, and how it sort of disappeared after the 1950s. And so it's really a historical interest.
Interesting. So
Yeah.
Paxton, you should know about my brother. So he's referencing like 1978. So you can see how far this goes. But there are 4 of us in our family, 4 siblings. And Eduardo is our eldest brother. His passion for football has contaminated, but all of us have somehow rubbed up against it. And even me, I remember at age 12, I wasn't into like the World Cup and all of that until much later in life. But I remember when I was like around 11 or 12 years old or so, all the cool kids in school were playing soccer, but not many girls. I mean, girls just started to get into that when I was that age, right? But at that point, I was already like the biggest, most out of shape person probably I could be. I hadn't been playing at all, any sport, but because my brother was so passionate about it and he, talked about it so vividly, I wanted to play. So my mom put me on a soccer team, and the first practice when they had us, run 4 laps around the field and I almost passed out, I knew the sport was not for me. At least at that time, I wasn't ready for it. And plus I was so self-conscious about my body, and I was self-conscious about my athleticism or lack of it. And I was with cool kids. So I dropped out after that practice. Actually, no, I think I went to the first game that weekend. And then I was like, no, I can't. But I think I would have been really good because I got back into it later on, but in my own special way. But I'm curious. So before we delve into the soccer piece, I'm just curious about what you've heard from each other so far. What stands out to you?
think the World Cup is so pivotal in so many people's lives, that if you ask someone, that they always know when a World Cup was in their life that made an impact. And for me, it was the 2002 World Cup. I think it was South Korea. And that's what genuinely made me want to play soccer professionally. It was we can go into that story, but that I just know, like, everybody has, it was this World Cup, and for Eduardo, it was this World Cup that really got me started. And then even for you saying, you hear that the World Cup is around, and everyone just seems to have such camaraderie around that time, and that's just so cool, so beautiful about football.
So tell us, what was it about it?
Well, it was so 2002 World Cup. To preface this, I wanted to play tennis professionally growing up. And I wanted to, being in New York, the US Open was here. I wanted to be the next Andre Agassi, whatever. And then one year in 2002, the World Cup was on. And at that time, it was in South Korea. So the games were around like 2 a.m. in the morning. And it was a school night. And I was allowed to stay up. And at that time, you had to buy them on pay-per-view. They didn't just stream them like they do now. So we had to pay for it. So it was already a big deal. It's like, you better stay up because we're paying for this thing. So I stayed up. I was able to do it on a school night. So it was like breaking the rules. And it was the England game versus Brazil. And with my father being English, this was the first time I saw him light up when the game was on. The first time I ever saw passion like that. As a tennis player, it wasn't like, it was nice claps and whatever, but like, my dad really going after and seeing the fans sing and there's so much passion behind it. And then to see them lose the way that they lost pretty heartbreakingly. And it was just like, hold on a second, I got to get involved in this. This is what I want to do. So I came home the next, week or so, and I just said, Mom, Dad, I don't want to pursue professional tennis anymore. I want to play soccer. And that was it. It just changed right there. But it was the World Cup that was just like a definitive moment in my life.
Wow, yeah. For me, until 1986, soccer did not have, or football rather, did not have that, was not the number one sport. For me, it was baseball. But those were the two sports that I played. Didn't play anything else. And I was able to keep up more with baseball living here in the United States than with football, just because it was easier. But then the 1986 World Cup came along, and there was one match, the semifinal match between Argentina and Belgium. Maradona scored 2 goals. And after that, I didn't want to know about any other sport. And it had everything to do with how he played in that match. It was a foregone conclusion, basically, 5 minutes into the match, that Argentina was going to win. But the way that he played, I was not interested in anything else anymore after that. So that was my World Cup transformation story there.
What did Maradona do in that particular game that made it so memorable?
Well, he scored the 2 goals that had Argentina win, but it was the way that he scored them, right? So the first goal, I can picture right now, the other attacker, Jorge Burruchaga, has the ball on the right wing. He comes in just outside of the penalty area, comes in from the touch line, and he passes diagonally into the penalty area. Maradona runs in, followed by 2 other defenders surrounding him, and with his left foot just hits the ball past the defenders and past the incoming goalkeeper. It was a very oblique strike, the goalkeeper was covering the near post of his goal, and Maradona managed to flick the ball with his left foot towards the far post. It was just a fantastic run, pass, everything. And I thought, how did he do that? and then the second goal was just fantastic. The second goal, Maradona gets the ball at the top of the key, which is like the half circle, right on top of the penalty area, and then he just dribbles in, stutter steps, dribbles in, goes to his left. They're pretty much trying to shift him over to the left of the, push him off the center of the area, and it doesn't matter. He just manages to left foot the ball into the opposite side of the goal, and there's nothing that any of them can do. He's off balance while he's doing this. That was it. At that moment, I think our dad changed the channel, and I didn't care. I just took the soccer ball outside and I started kicking it around. I was like, this is it. I have to, this is my sport. So that was it.
You know what's so interesting to hear the two of you talk. Both of you describe really this moment in time where there's a lot of passion, right? Either the passion of your dad, Paxton, right, or the people in the stadium, or Eduardo, this moment where you saw one of the best players of the sport do something with the love and spirit and the skill, right, that lit a passion for the sport in you. So I'm just curious because, I think the reason I brought the two of you together is not just because you play soccer. I mean, that was like tangentially, the superficial one is like, oh, you both play soccer, that's cool. But also, I think there's a level of commitment and passion for the sport. I mean, if you're going to play it professionally, it requires that at least minimally, right? And if you're going to be for years and years committed to following and knowing and remembering a moment in time and describe it as vividly as you just did, that there's some passion around it. So I'm curious, as you're hearing one another, and first of all, you don't know each other. This is literally the first time you met. So what's there for you now in this experience? Like, if you were to just bring us into what's happening in your head about this conversation, what's there?
I'd have to say, I mean, it's so funny, like you said, Valerie, about how vividly he can describe that moment in time. I mean, how many years ago was it? But it's just so vivid. And to go back to the first game that I went to, I could relive every single goal that I saw, and I even hear the way that they hit the ball in that moment. It's just like, it's so cool to know that everyone involved in football has these moments. I mean, there's always a moment that you remember that sticks out to you, like that you just will remember forever, as a player, as a supporter, as you watch. And so for him to go through those two goals and vividly explain, what it was that happened, must have made a profound impact on them, So it's cool that has that such like potency, the game.
Yeah. And right now, I'm just kind of swimming in the past right now. That one of the memories I have of Liverpool is I think it was the FA Cup, 1989 FA Cup against Everton. I want to say it was the final of the FA Cup, which I believe is like the oldest cup competition in the world. Anyway, I remember that final because I just happened to chance on it. It was 89? Was it 89 or 90? Maybe it was 89. It was an 89 cup final. And I just happened to chance on it on TV, which was weird. living where we're living in Alabama, that I would be able to watch the FA Cup final. And it was Liverpool and Everton. Some of my favorite players in England were playing on both of those teams, right? And one of the players that I tried really hard to keep up with, this was after the 1986 World Cup, was a guy by the name of John Barnes, who played for Liverpool, and another by the name of Peter Beardsley. Peter Beardsley also played for Liverpool, and there was another guy, what's his name? Ian
Rush.
Ian Rush, that's right. Ian Rush, who was their top striker. They won that cup final. It was exciting because that was the first live match that I saw of English football, first ever. And I was seeing some of my favorite players, right? So, and then the very following year was the 1990 World Cup. By that time, I was already at university and just, trying really hard to catch the matches and seeing which of those players had made it to the national team. So those are the things that I have in my head right now. Kind of random, but I suppose that's my Liverpool connection. And the other thing that I wanted to ask was, how long is your real name, Paxton?
How long?
Yes. You don't have like 11 names.
No. No, it's just the traditional 2, yeah.
Okay. I was wondering how big of a fan your dad was.
No.
Okay. Just wondered. Because, I've read about people who really, really hardcore about their team, and they name their kid with all 11 names of their starting 11 players of the team.
Okay, so hang on a second. Eduardo, so if you had to guess, although Paxton, you've already said that you don't have other additional names, but if you had to add names to Paxton Ballard, which names would you add?
Well, now that I know that he's from the generation that saw Steven Gerrard playing, or that started from there, I suppose it would be, Steven Gerrard's name would be one of them.
You'd be the only one.
Probably Gerrard.
The only one?
You'd be the only one.
Your favorite player, right?
Yeah, he's in a class of his own in my book.
So. A class of his own. Yeah, he was something else. He, I don't know how he scored so many long distance goals. He was just nuts.
Just went for it, man. He was bold, like it was. Valerie, if you didn't know who he was, I mean, this man would shoot from 40 yards out, which is, and he would just go for it, and it would go in, and it'd be like, but if but it was cool because no one had the boldness to do that. Like, why would you shoot from that long away? You're crazy. We got to get a better calculated risk, and he just had the confidence in his right foot to do it, and that's what made him. So I was watching a documentary on him one time, and when he was he was on trial kind of with Liverpool, and he was playing with the first team. And what stood out to some of these top players at the time was like normally when you get a young kid in, they're very timid, they're very shy,
tentative,
basketball. And the first thing he did was, as soon as he got the ball, he pinged it 40 yards, or he did something like as if he'd been there his whole life. And it was just like, at that moment, they knew he was going to be a big player. And he was everything that I wanted to be as a footballer, as a leader, as a captain. I just loved everything about him. He was never in the newspapers for the wrong reasons. He was always there for football. He had a couple scuffles here and there, but it was just like, it was a great idol for me to have and to aspire to be growing up and watching him play. To see him play live was just the game changer for me.
Cool.
And I think if I remember anything Eduardo's taught me over the years, what I remember anyways, the kind of the cornerstone of British soccer is these long shots, right? It's not part of You've told me that before.
Not the long shots, more like the long passes.
Passes. Okay, let me call them passes.
They used to get on my, well, they still do get on my nerves, but anyway, it's thankfully it's not the same way these days as it used to be. It used to be, okay, case in point, 1986 World Cup. I was very disappointed in the English national team that World Cup. I thought they had wasted a great group of players. I thought that they were kind of lackadaisical in the way that they approached the game. For example, the most famous game, the game against Argentina, which Maradona scores the two most famous goals in the World Cup history, the goal with the hand and the other one where he just dribbles, you know, from midfield into the goal. There were just a lot of long ball passing that was going nowhere. And that kind of encapsulated for me what did not work about not just English football, just British football generally at that time. And then, and that I think pretty much continued until the mid 90s. And then something clicked finally. And at that time, mid 90s, I would say it's because a lot of European coaches started filtering into the English Premier League, especially the Premier League, started filtering in there, bringing in their new ways and methods, and then gradually transformed English footballing culture. So now you don't see as much of that long ball business, and that's not just the long ball too. I eventually discovered that there are some other things about how English footballers prepared for the games, and after the all kinds of different things shifted after more European coaches started coming in, European coaches and players. But that's what I meant by that, long passing thing, Valerie, because it just got on my nerves. God, waste. Anyway, it was just a pet peeve. Just the other day, I was watching just replaying that whole game, Argentina against England, 1986 World Cup.
You were watching it again?
Periodically, I watch my favorite matches. Because I like to watch them. I don't watch every match. I watch my favorite matches. Argentina, England is one of them, and Brazil, France is the other one. From the 1986 World Cup, those are my two. And Argentina, Germany from the final of the 86 World Cup. Those are my two favorites. Or I'll watch the whole thing because I'm not bored. I'm actually engaged. Like, what actually happened here? Why did they do that? Why did the coach not change that player at halftime? Stuff like that. Because now I'm starting to see things, or learning to see things from a coaching point of view, because that's what I want to develop next.
Paxton, have you watched those matches?
Not that far back, and to be honest, the game against England, the Argentina game against England is probably one of the most famous. Like what Eduardo said. The goals that he scored were, one, controversial, and then two, you couldn't take it away from him. It was probably one of the best goals we've ever seen. You see him on every highlight tape ever to this day. They're invincible. It'll live forever. And right now, I think, obviously the football world is mourning the loss of Diego Maradona, because it was, for me, that would be like my generation losing a Lionel Messi or a Cristiano Ronaldo. Such impact on football. So, it's so big that you see like in Argentina, there's two very big rival clubs, Boca Juniors and River Plate, and they actually came together in the middle of the pandemic, and they sang songs about Maradona because he played for both, where they're one of the most violent derbies in the world. And for one man to have an impact like that, it was sad for him to go the way that he did, because he was such a blessing to the world of football. But I haven't watched those games, but I just know the potency that they had, and what he brought to the sport. When I told my dad that Maradona died, however, I have to admit, there was a part of him that paused and said, well, because of the handball that he did against England that knocked him out of the World Cup. So like, you couldn't take the passion out of him. And then he goes, oh, well, that's pretty bad. But there was just kind of like that last dig at him, because as if he deserved it. But
so one of the reasons that I brought the two of you guys together, I mentioned a few times, is because I also wanted to hear and see how people who are passionate about something interact with each other. So, and it's awkward. I think part of it for me too is like I want to hear more. I don't know enough to contribute meaningfully to the conversation about football, right? But I do find it fascinating to observe two guys. So I'm curious about when you guys meet other people who have a passion for the sport, like how do you engage? Like what's the thing that would like have you guys go hang out and talk more about this, if anything?
I would say this is the first time, or not the first time, maybe one of the few times where I'm meeting someone I don't know previously and talk about football. What usually happens is I'll meet someone out in the football field and we'll just start playing, kicking around. And then the talking comes later. But first, we kick around. So this is not new, but it's not the typical situation for me.
All right, so play first, talk later. Paxton, for you?
Yeah, you tend to find out. First of all, it really always starts with who do you support. It's like who is it that your affiliation with? And it can drastically change the conversation right there. It can either go forward or it becomes, maybe save it for now. Yeah. So like if I as a Liverpool supporter and someone comes up to me and they're a Manchester United supporter, it's just all of a sudden like, well, there's a bit of animosity there for a little bit, but it's been good fun. But even that leads to conversation, and reasons to why they started to support United and why I support Liverpool and stuff like that. So usually the question was, oh, do you support anyone and why? And then that usually, leads us to, football or backgrounds or whatever.
I think that's an interesting point because any sport, I imagine, has these moments of friction, right? If you don't support the same team, or maybe what you thought went well for one team, the other person feels like, no, it didn't. So how do you have a meaningful conversation about something when you have such strong opinions about
it? It's changed. The football, I mean, Eduardo could probably have more of a say on this, but I mean, it was violent way back. I mean, it was bad where, and he can probably tell stories, and even the stories that my dad taught me or told me, there was no cameras at the time. There was no policing. It was, you let the fans take care of what they had to take care of, and that was it. It was very laissez-faire like approach. Until like it got really violent and it was bad. So now there's still that rivalry, but it's not as violent as it was. It's more of a, intellectual debate than it is, us actually, going at each other. So, and that's what makes the game so great though. I mean, that if everyone agreed with you, it wouldn't be that great. I mean, the whole point of the passion is to want to beat the teams, that you don't like, or your team's rivals and stuff like that. So it's changed a lot. So it's not a violent conversation. It's not like a, me against you type thing, but it does create a tremendous competition for sure.
What teams?
Yeah, I'll say about that I suppose if I were to meet someone right off the bat in a footballing context, that's more of an iffy situation because you don't know if the other person is a reasonable person or not, with whom you can have an interesting discussion. Mm. But if there's some other way in which you meet people, if I meet someone and, you know, we're having a conversation about, I don't know, whatever, it could be books, it could be, for example, I have two sets of parents whose children I teach at the school where I've been working. One of them is a Chelsea Football Club fan. The other one's an Everton Football Club fan. So just in the course of conversation about academics and how well their daughters are doing, it comes up, hey, isn't that a, you know, Chelsea jersey, or is that an Everton football crest? And the conversation is different already because we know one another's reasonable people talking about ordinary things or important things already. So there's less likelihood that I'm going to think that you're a hooligan if I'm already talking to you and, you know, we're just getting along about important things. And then I say Everton, you're not going to turn into some, you know, troglodyte and try to beat me over the head. You're going to say, oh, you're a, you know, whatever fan. Oh, okay. I'm sorry for you, or whatever, you know, but it's not going to be ugly or terrible. It's just going to be, oh, why do you support them? How do you know about that? You know, whatever, and it'll be an interesting conversation. So that's my experience of that.
Just being curious about, depending on the reaction to whatever the comment or the question is, it sounds like both of you would just kind of tread cautiously. Paxton, I'm curious, tell us a little bit about your professional experience. We didn't get a chance to chat about that yet. So,
yeah, so I mean, journeyman's a great word, I think. I've been all over. I've never made it quite to the top level that I aspired to, like the Steven Gerrards, and I mean, those are one-offs. But upon graduating from college, I just booked a one-way ticket to England. I had dual citizenship. So I was able to just go there and not have to worry about working or anything. And every year, every year going back, we would go, my father would take me to a Liverpool game through college and every year. And we had a family friend out there that every year we would meet up. And basically we slowly started to put these things into place. Like, hey, listen, after graduation, Paxton's coming over and he might need a place to stay. And, you know, who do you know in the football world and stuff like that. So we made it work that when I did fly over, I would stay with this family friend for the time being and try and get my feet underneath me. And so I stayed with this beautiful, beautiful family, Turkish family in Bolton, near Manchester. And one day, once I'm over there, it's about 2 weeks. I'm about a week into living there. The family friend says, "Hey, come down to the pub. You know, there's a lot of footballers there. There's a lot of you know, people that know people in football, whatever. Just come down. We'll network. We'll have a drink, whatever." So we do that. And there's a guy there by the name of Tony Coton. You might know Tony Coton. He was a goalkeeper, maybe Manchester City back in the day, like 80s, 90s.
Not familiar.
And yeah, you'll know if you look him up. He's really involved in football now, like behind the scenes. But basically, he said, my friend is coaching a team up here tomorrow, and they're playing in a friendly behind closed doors. Do you have your boots? And it was as simple. And I said, yeah, I got all my stuff. I'm here to pursue it. So I went down to the game, had a really good showing. I played really well. And then the club invited me down to preseason for, you know, the remaining of preseason. And this was with Hereford United, which, as you know, and like you said, in the FA Cup, big name within England. They're not at the top level, but they've what they're called. They did a really big game against Newcastle, and they knocked out like a huge team, and they got kind of famous from that. So I ended up doing really well, and 2 weeks later, I signed my first professional contract. And then typically when I tell the story, it's like, oh my, like it just goes on this trajectory. But for that club had so many issues that it was just what you don't see. What we see on TV is like this amazing. We see the 1% of what goes on, but what's amazing in football is that the leagues underneath it are still professional, but it's nothing like the top leagues. And
Right.
My first club actually folded from financial reasons. And we showed up to training one day, just to give you the quick story, and there was locks on the gate, and the gaffer, the manager, basically just said, hey, thank guys, just I don't know what to tell you, but we ran out of money, and that's the end of that. And that was it. The club folded. And now I'm living in England I got nowhere to go. They've already late months on our payments because it was just so much corruption going into it. And this happens on the daily in England and at the professional level. So much corruption, so much crazy stuff. So I fly home, and then I just bounced around the leagues. I went back to England. I just started knocking on doors, and I signed with a plethora of clubs throughout Europe and in America. I signed with the New York Cosmos. I played mostly with the reserves. But even that was a big club, as you know, Eduardo with Pele and all these big names. So that was a fun time. And then I most recently was in Sweden, playing in the third division, and I loved it over there. It really suited my style of play. It wasn't the English kick and run. It was very technical, and I like to play that way. And I was signed to go back in March, and then 2020 the pandemic hit. So I'm a little bit at a standstill right now, but I love everything that football brought me. And up to this point, it brought me to people like you, and it brought me to an amazing next chapter that I'm pursuing now in executive coaching. So that's kind of been my quick story of my journey. And, it's been an amazing experience for sure. But, I've loved every minute of it. As hard as it's been pretty cool.
Why executive coaching? Well, where is that? How do you get into that?
So when the pandemic hit, a family moved close down the street from New York City, and she had a son that was playing soccer, about 9 or 10 years old. And they found out I was playing professionally, but I was at home. So they asked if I could train their son. So I did, and we started to work together, and we created a really, really nice relationship. And at the end of the summer, they were moving back down to the city, and I was having a conversation with the mom, and she was like, with soccer at a standstill, Paxton, what is it that you'd like to do? What is it that you'd like to maybe look next chapter to? And I said, I really think I want to get into coaching. And at that time, she said she might have thought like X's and O's or coaching within the soccer world. But I said, no, not coaching X's and O's, but coaching people. And I'm fascinated behind what makes a person tick. I got my degree in finance. It was okay. I wasn't in love with it, but I was so much more attracted to who was the person behind the sale, who was the person behind the role. I was just so attracted by what made a person tick. And even in the football world, when you have 11 different players on a pitch that come from different cultures, backgrounds, races, and ethnicities, it's like, how do you get the best out of that person? Because what I say to Eduardo, I can't say to Valerie. I can't, and that is the same concept in an organization or in your own business or something like that. So I just knew that what I've learned from football could be applied. And when she said, oh my days, you have to speak to my aunt who's involved in this Berkeley Executive Coaching Institute. And so I had a great conversation with her, and then I enrolled in the Berkeley Executive Coaching Institute, and here I am. 10 days later, after an intensive course, I'm working to get my certification now. But everything I learned from football translated so well into this next chapter that I can kind of take what I've learned and put into practice.
The reason I asked is because I thought for a moment that maybe you would have made contact with the Johan Cruyff Institute or the Johan Cruyff Academy. Johan Cruyff, after his playing days, after his coaching time, retired altogether from management and decided to put all his footballing knowledge as a player and coach into preparing people to be football managers, into being club managers, into developing themselves as organizational experts around football. And then eventually, I think beyond football, just, the whole coaching and administration of sports and beyond became interesting to him too. So I thought maybe you had gone to one of his courses, but you were you went directly through the Berkeley program. So just curious, I thought.
Yeah, and I think that's where it stems from, because when you look at someone like Johan Cruyff, who also completely changed the game and made, Barcelona who they are today and stuff like that, that was his philosophy. And it was so contrarian to the way we did things before. It was very kind of gung-ho, run faster, sprint faster. But what we realized was you're dealing with 11 human beings, and I think I hate to quote a Manchester United legend, but he's a legend. Sir Alex Ferguson said, like, what people don't realize is you don't have 11 robots on the field. You have 11 human beings that are dealing with all of life, a limited amount of energy and fatigue and things like that. You can't just tell them to run at 100% for 90 minutes and expect that to happen. So if you take that kind of mentality and you bring it into any other sphere in this world, it's true. People have to carry what the world brings them and deliver on their job. So I just figured that, soccer gave me that vision, that knowledge, and now I can apply it to, all organizations. So yeah, Johan, I'm going to look into that too, because I think he continues to change the game now, still with his philosophy.
You're just scratching the surface. And I think that's the full circle. That's how Paxton and I connected, right? Because I'm part of the faculty for the Berkeley Executive Coaching Program. And then knowing what I know about my brother, I was like, oh my gosh, absolutely. So just curious, and I welcome you guys to continue the conversation about football well beyond this moment in time, but I'm curious about how are you feeling now? No, first of all, two things. Before I ask how you're feeling now, what had you say yes to just being in a conversation in the first place? Like going into it, and as we started, how did you feel then and how did you feel now?
I said yes out of curiosity to see how this program would work out for you, and being curious about Paxton. Like, it's great to be able to talk to a professional.
I hope it can continue.
I think I froze or you froze. Hello? There we go.
Yeah, you're good.
Hey.
All right. I heard everything.
Sorry about that. The question is, how did you feel then when you said yes to this invitation versus how do you feel now?
Yeah, so I said yes because it was it felt like there was nothing to lose, and we could have a great conversation about football. And like you said, I mean, once we go down one thread, it just leads to a world of conversation. So I know that that's the best thing about football is, I mean, Eduardo said it before, was the ball is multicultural, multilingual. I mean, as soon as the ball starts rolling, it doesn't matter where you're from or what happened, you just play. So that's really cool. So I just feel more affirmed that if anyone needed football more in this world, like we do now, and just to have a conversation around it is so easy for us, but I hope that anyone that watched this can take from it, all you need is one common ground to open up a whole plethora of conversation. It doesn't have to just be football. So I'm excited that the goal of your podcast was to do that, and that it's showing, it's bearing fruit. So that's
really cool.
And Eduardo, I may have missed what you said because I was frozen for a bit, but what about for you?
Yeah, I said yes because I was curious to see how this program, this new podcast was going to work out for you, and because I wanted to meet Paxton. Not every day I get to talk to a professional footballer, so that's always cool,
What was surprising What was surprising for you guys about this experience or the conversation? About yourself or about what you heard?
I love the vividness and that and passion that oozes from Eduardo. It was so cool. Like it was like just transported right back to where he was saying where he was, what it was like, and as he was explaining it, I totally envisioned the way that it looked. And I don't know if that's because I've seen it before or now all of a sudden, like I'm gonna have to compare both. I'm gonna look at the actual footage and my imagination. But that comes from it obviously having an impact, in his life, and for him to vividly explain it the way that he does. You can't just do that without it actually having such an impact. So I thought that was really cool.
Yeah. Um, I guess the same for me as far as, for example, that Liverpool scarf. That for me says everything. Not here in the United States. We don't get that with football, with soccer, as I say here. But someone that has a football scarf from an English Premier team, that's okay. This is the real deal. All right, and on top of that, a professional footballer, and having all those experiences in multiple places, that was not surprising in the sense like, oh wow, but more like we need to continue talking more. This is we haven't started. We haven't said anything yet. I haven't heard anything yet.
I know.
There's more.
That's all. This is just to whet the appetite. You're skimming the surface. And so then I'm also curious about what would you talk about next if and when you have the opportunity to talk, like what questions are still burning, or just to ask the question right now. I'm just curious what pops in your head.
Well, I would ask Paxton about all the different places where he's played. I'd like to hear more about, the story of that club that folded. There's a lot. There's a lot of the Swedish club experience. Just all of that, all of it. New York Cosmos. I mean, there's a lot.
And what about for you, Paxton?
I'd like to share that too. I think it would just lead to a bunch of cool stories, for both of us. Because I think when saying it, Eduardo go, "Oh, that reminds me of this thing," and then we could go all over the place. I would love to know what it was like growing up in Panama and football down there, because I know football is big down there for sure. And how you kept that from as you immigrated to the United States and you held on to. I would love to go down, your family's history and where you went and why football stayed so close to you. I mean, you said Alabama, and football didn't become big in America really until the last 10, 15 years, where we could watch it on TV without having to jump through hoops to get it. And the fact that you were able to get games in Alabama at the time, it just didn't seem like soccer was being played down there. It was only the American football down there, and that's it. So I would love to see how you kept the football so close to you throughout your journey. Would be really cool.
I guess I'll say something briefly about that. In Panama, when we were growing up, football wasn't as big as it is now. It's become bigger and bigger and bigger. It's blown up. And now that Panama actually participated in its first World Cup in 2018, now it's, I'm not there, but I'm getting told by people there that it's hit, bonanza times, right? So
Panama had always been represented in Copa America, right?
And not always. It was kind of a hit miss kind of situation for Panama, because most of the players in the national team did not have a strong league to play in Panama. dedicated footballers had to play in Costa Rica or in Colombia or wherever they could find a team that would have them. Mexico, for example, in the case of two players, they actually made it into the Spanish league. The former Panamanian national team coach, a guy by the name of Deli Valdez, Julio Deli Valdez, played for Malaga, Futbol Club de Malaga, for several seasons, and another guy played in Tenerife, actually, in the Canary Islands, and was coached by Jorge Valdano before Jorge Valdano went to coach Real Madrid. But those are the only, those are the two best players, and that was in the early 90s. Generally speaking, Panamanian players tended to be, for a long time, now it's getting better, for a long time tended to be semi-pro, most of them, because that's what there was in Panama. There were accountants and school teachers and this and that, and then played football on the side, and they were good enough to be called up to the national team. And there was always a national team, just not terribly competitive. But like I said, now it's improving leaps and bounds. In my particular case, 1978 World Cup was my first World Cup, in the sense that I was conscious of it and I knew what it was and I was keeping up with it and trying to collect stickers at the time. But it was for more of a social thing, right? Other friends in our street were doing the same thing and we could talk about it and occasionally kick around also. But it was in competition with baseball. Baseball was the big thing. And initially, once we moved to the United States, baseball was just the main sport. I just never stopped being interested in football and keep up with it the best I could, reading things. Like I remember, I totally missed the 1982 World Cup. I found out about the 1982 World Cup by reading a magazine, a Canadian magazine called Maclean's. That did a fantastic report on the World Cup. And I found that magazine I was just, I don't know, picking up things and just happened on it. I wasn't even looking for it. I didn't know that I didn't know about Maclean's, and I didn't know Maclean's published a report on the 1982 World Cup. I just happened on it at the local library just before the 1986 World Cup. It was random.
Looks like football found you.
I think so.
In the
force,
random places.
Chlorians, I don't know, something. Just and that's how that happened. So,
well, look, gentlemen, I can see we've only struck the match.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it'll burn bright in many ways. But I'm curious, what are you guys taking away from this conversation?
I'd say I'm just gonna go back to the common ground that we found. We met less than an hour ago, just over an hour, I'd say now, and the space that football allowed the curtain to open, and now all of a sudden it's conversations. And then, if we were in person, I'm sure it would lead to, okay, well, tell me about your teaching, you're a teacher I hear and stuff like that. So that's what I just love about it. It just opens the door. It just gets your foot in the door with someone. And, in a world where we're so apart from one another, it's such an amazing entry point. So I'm glad that there's still that hope of football, and hopefully that we can be in person and have this conversation soon.
Yeah. Football opens the world. That's football is one way that we can open the world.
Yeah.
That's definitely my experience.
Okay.
Yeah. I only wish we could kick around now. Go outside and kick by myself. Okay.
Well, I mean, you could do it social distancing if you did decide to get together.
Good sport for that, but they say football's best friend is a wall because he always passes back to you. So that's what I've been doing for the last 6 months. I'm tired of my friend. I want to play with other people.
Good for you. Good for you. That's what I did immediately after Maradona scored that second goal against Belgium. That's where I went. I went to the wall, the soccer ball, and I used to whack that ball against the wall.
And we never heard the end of it ever again. We actually have a picture of that wall. We were like in elementary school, and recently showed a picture of the wall where we used to live on a military base, and luckily we had a wall. Otherwise, we'd been arrested by the MPs by that point for disturbing the peace. But gentlemen, sadly, the conversation, at least on the podcast, has come to a close. I want to thank you guys both so much. First of all, and I know it's not easy. I don't take it for granted that you both accepted my invitation to meet someone completely random and do it on such a public platform, but to also share part of your heart, right? You have obviously a heart for the sport and for your experiences and sharing that with all of us. So appreciate your generosity in having done that. And then also, and at least, I know we haven't really gotten to the depth of the conversation you want to get to, but at least being able to get curious enough to know that there's more to come, hopefully, in whatever form that takes. So thank you guys so much for being here. Appreciate you. Any last words before we close?
Thank you, Val. Thank you for creating this space. And I think you're really onto a great podcast because it's brought two people together so quickly. And I think the only downfall was that we only had this much time. And I think we had more. But thank you. And Eduardo, it was lovely chatting to you. I hope that we can stay connected and then just stay, have a good chat about football and follow each other's progress.
Yeah. Let's exchange emails and all of that.
Cool.
And what I wanted to say is what occurs to me now is if we had met, like if I ran into you, Valerie, at a bookstore or someplace, right? And you're there with Paxton, you're both coaches, you're both working out of the Berkeley coaching cohort, and I just happened to meet you there. This meeting right here occurs to me like running into you and then you introducing us, and then we start talking about what we talked about. So it seemed also very organic. It didn't seem to me like a put on kind of thing. It felt like it could be, how it would work any other place, running into people.
Which is the intention, yeah. I think I'm a good matchmaker. I would say so myself. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. And for those of you who listened in to this impassioned conversation about football and the periphery of football through this, thank you so much for joining us as well. Know that you can subscribe to this podcast on notquitestrangers.com, or you can also go to our YouTube channel, connect to Joy YouTube channel and subscribe there. And that way you won't miss a single episode. There is more to come. And as we continue to explore what it is that brings people together and have meaningful conversations, I hope you join us, not only in listening, but having your own meaningful conversation with others. Have a wonderful rest of the day, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Happy New Year.
You've been listening to the podcast Not Quite Strangers. Be sure to subscribe or follow on your favorite video or podcast platform. And for more information and content, go to notquitestrangers.com. See you next time.